A mother would become a killer at her daughter's murder trial. She took justice in her own hands and became known as the country's infamous revenge mother. In a time before metal detectors and security for the courthouse, this grieving mother walked right up to the accused and shot him to death. But did she deserve the sentence that she was given? You are such a genuine gem. Thank you for clicking on my video. I'm Brooke Makenna, but today's case is about a mother who became a vigilante after her daughter was abducted and murdered. And there is just a lot of competing opinions, and nobody really knows what to think about how this went down, what the real motive was, and also if the sentencing was enough and if she should have gotten more time, less time. There's just so much that people have opinions on in this case, so I will let you listen to all of it, leave your opinions down below. It's a crazy one. I also want to thank our sponsor, Scentbird, for allowing me to share with you guys one of the biggest ways that I find confidence. To me, fragrance is the best way to instantly make yourself feel good, and Scentbird actually allows you to try out different perfumes, colognes, unisex scents every single month without having to splurge on the price of the actual perfume, the whole perfume. You get enough for a 30-day use. This is not just a sample size, it is 30 days worth, and in fact I have been using one of mine that I got from Scentbird for like a year now. But there's actually so much in these cute little bottles. They're also the perfect size to just stick in your purse to be able to take everywhere with you. This time I tried Michael Germain Orange Blossom Garden and French Vanilla, and it makes me feel extra fancy. And then I also finally tried the Pink Sugar Red Velvet, and I smell like a mixture between a candle store and a candy shop in the best way. Seriously, you're gonna want to eat this one. So you can smell like me or pick your own. But you can use the code McKenna55 for 55% off your first month on Scentbird. That means it's only a little over $7, and you can get this in the USA or in Canada. So let's get back to the story. So it was 1980 in Germany, and the Bachmeier family lived in Lübeck. This was Marianne, who was 29 years old and a mother to 7-year-old daughter Anna. Now, Marianne was a single mother who worked as a waitress for a local bar and restaurant called Tapaza, and Anna was this happy, open-minded, free kind of child who was born on November 14th of 1972. She was in elementary school at the time, and she spent a lot of her time alone playing outside. She was just the kind of child that would entertain themselves. But on May 5th of 1980, 7-year-old Anna decided that she was not going to go to school. You see, she and her mother had gotten into an argument, and Anna was upset. She wanted to just go see a friend instead of going to school. So she left the house that morning so that her mother wouldn't know she didn't go to school, and she ended up going to see if her friend was home. Her friend had gone to school though, so she ended up just walking around aimlessly, doing whatever she wanted. However, she would never be seen alive again. You see, her mother worked mostly nights, and so she would sleep most days while Anna was in school. So she was unaware that her daughter was, missing, that she had never made it to school that day. So she woke up around the afternoon because she had a photo shoot for a newspaper, because she had this really cool Volkswagen van that was covered in paintings, and this journalist wanted to cover a story about it. And so she was going to the photo shoot that afternoon. Then she returned and noticed that Anna was not home from school, nor was she coming home at all. She was searching the area, but she also thought that Anna might just be at a friend's house. However, when it turned dark, that's when she decided to go to the police. Anna was not at any of her friends' house. Her friends did not know where she had gone, nor was she coming home. No one had actually seen her at all, or at least they weren't claiming to. But what no one knew at the time was that Anna had actually been abducted by a neighbor and taken inside of his home. She was there for hours before being killed, stashed in a cardboard box, and left at the bank of a canal in a shallow grave. Though her remains would not be the reason that the investigators knew that this was even a murder. It was actually that a woman would walk into the police department the afternoon after she had vanished, and she would tell the police what her fiancé had done. She told police that the man she was planning to marry confessed to murdering Anna Bachmeyer. This was a 35-year-old butcher named Klaus Grabowski. He was also Anna and Marianne's neighbor. The woman said that he had confessed to her that he had seen Anna walking across the street that day. She went to say hello to her neighbor, who often let her play with his cat. So on this day, when she asked to play with the cat, Klaus took her up into his apartment. With this confession and the confirmed missing girl, they rushed over to Klaus's apartment, and there they would find a note that was roughly translated from German to English in this article to say that he had been waiting to give his fiancée a hug, that he needs courage now, and that he would be waiting at a local restaurant so that they could talk. That when she left to talk to the police, he actually was taking Anna in a cardboard box in order to put her on a bike and bury her in the banks. So investigators immediately headed to the spot at this restaurant that Klaus had mentioned and made sure that the woman didn't actually show up so that they could arrest him. They were waiting for him to arrive, not knowing if he would, and thankfully he did. So they arrested him immediately. Now, Klaus would confess to Anna's murder, claiming that he had strangled her with a pair of his fiancée's pantyhose. Investigators strongly believed, though, that the motive here was to do with a possible sexual assault of the child. However, Klaus did adamantly deny this. Instead, he would say that Anna tried to blackmail him, that she tried to seduce him and threatened him that she would tell her mom that he had molested her if he didn't give her money. So he said while she sat on the chair, he was behind her and strangled her with the pantyhose as she fought for her life. She was falling off the chair, and he continued to tighten the stockings until she was dead. And then he said he rode around aimlessly to find the right spot to bury her at the canal. Anna's remains were located at the canal where Klaus had confessed to, and her body had been hogtied. Marianne then refused to identify the body altogether. She didn't want to talk to the police, and investigators began to get really suspicious of her behavior, never seeing this from a victim's parent before. She didn't want anything to do with any of it. She was said to be distraught, and she would have many breakdowns in the following months. At Anna's funeral, Marianne and Anna's father, Christian, would actually have their friends record a Pink Floyd song to play, and everyone was wearing bright colors to make Anna happy. But her killer, Klaus Grabowski, was the opposite of a good Samaritan. He was their neighbor, but he was the neighbor everyone should have feared. You see, this was not the first time that Klaus was in trouble. And a decade prior, in 1973, he was charged with the attempted murder of a 6-year-old girl. He had tried to sexually assault her, but she ran away screaming from him. He chased her and began to strangle her, but this brave girl would not stop screaming, and so he ended up having to run away so that he wouldn't be caught. But he was ultimately caught for this. But 2 years later, he was said to sexually assault 2 9-year-old girls and was placed in a psychiatric facility. When he was taken to court for these charges, his doctor said that he had an addiction to his abnormal sexual instinct, and that without medical treatment, there was a risk that such acts would be repeated. So he was then given a chemical castration, hoping that that would reduce his sex drive. Now, Klaus actually chose a castration over a prison sentence and was released right after with no monitoring, no parole, just let go. And 5 years later, he murdered a 7-year-old girl. The trial began on March 3rd of 1981 in a very tiny courtroom, and Marianne sat in the front row and often shouted at Klaus. Now, it had been found that after his chemical castration, which can be reversed, Klaus had started hormone therapy to reverse it 2 years prior to Anna's murder. So, with this, his lawyers began to claim that he murdered her out of his hormonal imbalance. And the doctor who allowed this to occur to somebody who had been chemically castrated for his sexually violent crimes, he had to come and testify, and he said that he allowed the hormone therapy because he didn't know that it had anything to do with crimes, and he didn't look into it either. 3 days into the trial, on March 6th, it was said to be an unusually warm day. The courtroom wasn't as packed as it had once been, in the first 3 days, because Klaus had confessed to the murder. He pled guilty. So there wasn't a ton of people, not a ton of media. However, Marianne would be going every single day. And strangely enough, she walked into the courtroom this day with a green coat with her. She was holding it, she sat it on her lap, and it was said that she walked in the courtroom once, left, and then came back once again. And to the surprise of everyone in that courtroom, around 10 a.m., Marianne would walk over to where Claus was sitting with his back to her, waiting for the trial to resume. And she would pull a gun and aim it at his back, shooting 8 times. 7 of those would hit him. The .22 caliber Beretta 70 would cause Claus to slump over onto his desk and then fall to the floor, bleeding profusely. There were no metal detectors. There were no means of security to keep weapons out of the courtroom. No one to stop a mother from avenging her daughter. It wasn't thought of like this in the 1980s. But Marianne didn't try to escape. Knowing that her daughter's killer was most likely dead, she threw the gun to the floor, put her hands up, and waited to be arrested. She allegedly said at this time, "I wanted to kill him. I wanted to shoot him in the face. Unfortunately, I hit him in the back. I hope he's dead." It was also found that the undertaker at the cemetery where Anna had been buried asked Marianne if she wanted a single or a double grave for Anna, and she said, "It is for Anna and me. Soon I will be with her." She became known in the media as the Revenge Mother, and Claus was taken out of the courtroom where they tried to, get him medical attention, but it was too late, and he would leave a trail of blood. With so many wanting to know why Marianne would do this before the killer actually became the killer, he was just an accused at this point. He wasn't actually deemed the killer, so he went to his grave being an accused killer. And so many wondered why she would take justice into her own hands, but a lot of other people understood instantly, especially mothers. They were supporting her. They understood from the very beginning as to why she would do this and accepted that. But a lot was found out about Marianne and her past, and she was born on June 3rd of 1950 in a refugee camp. Her father, Joseph, had actually been in the military as a Nazi officer. It was said that he was an extremely strict alcoholic and that her mother, Hannah, was extremely religious. Marianne was said not to fit in with the family at all. She was free-spirited. She was often getting in trouble. And eventually her father did leave her mother, who would remarry. However, her stepfather was actually worse than her father. He was a man named Paul Wise, who was a professional wrestler and truck driver, and he was said to do things like create a garden outside their home and tell Marianne she couldn't play in it, and she refused to call him her stepfather and called him Uncle Paul instead. He then began to physically abuse her, and it was said to just be a very violent, toxic household. But as a teenager, Marianne fell in love. She snuck out of the house to meet him all the time, and at 16, Marianne became pregnant. She was then kicked out of the home by her stepfather, and her mother actually had to secretly get a room for her so she could stay somewhere, and her sisters would bring her meals every single day. After Marianne gave birth, she was allowed back home where the baby was sleeping on the kitchen table, and eventually her stepfather would place her in a home for unmarried mothers. Her boyfriend then broke up with her, and she decided to give the baby up for adoption. 2 years later, she was pregnant again with another boyfriend's baby, and he proposed, but she actually refused this. She was still deciding if she wanted to keep the baby at all when she was sexually assaulted by a stranger. She sent the man to trial for this, and afterwards was sent to a reform home by her stepfather. And while there and still pregnant, she attempted suicide. Thankfully, she and the baby survived, and her stepfather then randomly died. And so she had this baby and she moved back in with her mother. She allegedly called this baby Christina, and so she was raising Christina for a while. She was said to fall in love again with a man named Christian, and they kind of had an on-again and off-again relationship. Eventually, she got pregnant again by Christian, and he was said to be delighted with the news. However, she wanted to go back to her ex, Christina's dad, I believe. However, her ex then tried to rape her and then dumped her to find her own way home. Now, Christian, her boyfriend that she had just left, they started fighting all of the time. And so Christina, the baby that she had had with that ex, didn't really have the best home life. And so Marianne decided to give the baby up to Christina's father's parents. And then, Marianne and Christian still had this baby that they were having together. Marianne was 22 at this point, and Christian owned a local bar. So the two began working there during the nights, and they would actually work opposite shifts so they could take care of the bar and make the most money. But Christian then forced Marianne to marry a chef they had at the restaurant because he was facing being deported. Now, I'm not really sure what happened with this marriage, but at this point, Marianne and Christian's relationship was more like business partners. They sold the first bar, they opened a second. They really weren't this loving couple. And Marianne had Anna and then decided to get her tubes tied because she did not want to have any more children. So Marianne was pretty much a single mother of Anna at this point, and because of this, she often brought Anna to her job, which unfortunately was at a bar, where lots of the people who would go there would say that Anna was often sleeping on benches. She would fall asleep at school because she was up all night. It just wasn't the ideal area for a child. But it was said that Anna was often focused on doing her own things as a child, and she was more like a little adult. As she grew up, her mother had once given her all this attention, and now her mother wasn't as focused on her as she once was. And Anna, would go and see Christian, who still owned the other half of the bar, and would hang out with him, but he didn't want full custody of her either. It was said that when Marianne was home from work during the days, she was sleeping even if Anna was home, so Anna would be playing outside by herself often. And this didn't really bother Anna because it was all she knew. She would go around finding things to do, talking to other people, especially the neighbors. But Marianne knew that she was not being the best mom, and she was actually speaking to a married couple she knew about them taking in Anna as a foster child temporarily. This was still in the works. It wasn't anything confirmed when she was murdered. That day, Marianne had no idea she was missing as she slept, but it was said to greatly affect her afterwards, thinking back on it, that she let her daughter go out alone, and also the fact that they had argued before she was murdered. But now, she was the killer on trial for the murder of her daughter's killer. And while awaiting trial, she allegedly tried to take her life 5 different times. She was said to refuse to talk to the psychologist even when they tried to break her down to get her to open up. She was kept in a psychological facility until sentencing, and her lawyer said that she was in a very turbulent mental state. But on November 2nd of 1982, Marianne was on trial for murder. It was a madhouse with the media and the public all wanting to hear about what was going to occur. Marianne wasn't said to be afraid of the camera. She walked confidently. She didn't appear frail or afraid at all. Many women came to support her, especially mothers, and they were angry that she had to stand trial at all. Marianne did do an exclusive interview with Stern magazine that was her whole life story for around $1.6 million today. And this was allegedly to pay for her legal fees, and this is how we know so much about her childhood, because she actually told this magazine all about it. But the public, some of them, were torn between understanding her actions and condoning them, because the question was it premeditated or not? If we let this vigilante killer go free, what does that show everybody else? So this is what would be discussed for the next 25 days at her trial. Thousands were donating to her. They were trying to send her flowers. In fact, there was allegedly one bouquet with a note that said, "For you from a grandfather who would have done the same. You are not alone. Courage." But as more came out, especially about her childhood, where she actually gave that information to the magazine, people began to flip on her. They were saying that she was actually a neglectful mother, that this wasn't a revenge mother of a mother who loved her daughter. It was a mother who didn't care about her daughter until she was murdered. So Marianne would testify that before she killed Claus, she had a dream about killing him, and that she saw visions of her daughter in the courtroom, and that she heard that Claus had wanted to make a statement and had been listening to all of his lies about her daughter and didn't want to hear anymore. So she got the gun from someone that she knew at the bar, and she had actually hidden it at Anna's grave because she wanted it for self-defense. She said she'd never actually planned to murder him, she just didn't feel safe. She also admitted that she had taken it to Claus's trial every single day, and that day she just decided that she was going to kill him. A doctor would testify that he had asked for a handwriting sample after Marianne was arrested. He told her to write anything that she wanted on this piece of paper, and she wrote, "I did it for you, Anna." And then she wrote 7 hearts for the 7 years that Anna was alive. It was then revealed that Anna's father, Christian, was heard saying she did it. She actually did it in the courtroom, as though he knew that this was a possibility. Maybe they had talked about it, but I don't believe that he actually testified on why he said that. Psychologists testified that killing Anna was like killing Marianne herself. With all of this presented, the judge believed that she wasn't a threat to society, that this was a spontaneous act caused by the trauma of the court hearing. The murder charge was then dropped by the prosecution, and on March 2nd, 1983, Marianne was sentenced to 6 years for premeditated manslaughter. After only 3 years, she would be released, and then she would be on probation for the next 2 years and 10 months after that. But a survey was actually created to kind of test what the public thought about this. The Allenbach survey said that 28% thought the sentence was appropriate, 27% thought it was harsh, 25% felt it was light, and 20% were undecided. Marianne and Anna's father, Christian, would try to file a lawsuit against the doctor who went ahead and gave Claus this hormone therapy, even though he had taken a castration over a prison sentence. They tried to sue him for negligence. However, it was ultimately dismissed. After those 3 years, Marianne was released, and she was said to marry a German school teacher, and they moved to Nigeria. They then divorced in the 1990s, and Marianne moved to Sicily. This is actually where she would learn that she had pancreatic cancer, and she would move back to Germany. In 1994, knowing that she would pass soon, she did several TV and radio interviews. She claimed then that she shot her daughter's killer after careful consideration to enforce the law on him and to prevent him from further spreading lies about her daughter. She told another interviewer that she felt like she could finally breathe when she found out that he was dead. But she also said she was sorry that it happened, but not that he was dead. She said she didn't regret killing him, and she didn't want to forgive him for killing her daughter. Strangely enough, she also asked a reporter to film the last stages of her life. There were clips of her gardening, of her getting her hair washed. And with this strange pre-death documentary that she was creating, this is where a lot of people began to say everything that Marianne had ever done was for publicity, was for the spotlight. This murder of her daughter was the first time she was getting attention, and she wanted to further that this is a theory that some have come up with, that she just loved that spotlight a little too much, and that she wanted to carry it throughout her entire life. She ended up passing on September 17th of 1996 at 46 years old in the hospital. She is now buried in the same grave as Anna, and decades after her sentencing, a friend had actually admitted that Marianne had gone into the basement of the bar and did target practice with this gun before she shot Claus, because she wanted to make sure she was a good shot. I mean, do you think that she should have been sentenced to more than 6 years? Do you think 6 years was enough? Ultimately, it was just 3 years, but a mother whose daughter has just been killed, it's easy to understand why you would want justice. Vigilante justice is a very scary and dangerous topic and action. It can cause so much chaos. But in the back of our minds, we all can comprehend why Marianne would do this. However, do you believe that that makes a 3-year sentence okay? Do you think she should have stood trial for murder and gotten life? And why do you really believe that Marianne did this? To avenge her daughter? For a moment in the spotlight? Maybe a trauma response, an emotional, spontaneous decision she couldn't stop? Today, the courtroom where Marianne shot her daughter's killer has metal detectors, and everyone is now, searching for weapons. They know what to look out for. They're much more secure now, just as everywhere is. Back then, it definitely was not the case. It is a bit strange to me that she had her daughter's killer on trial. He was confessing. He was pleading guilty. He was at least never going to be roaming the streets again. And so at that point, you'd think that the mother would feel like there was justice. However, there was that element that she was speaking about where Claus just kept telling lies about her daughter, about her seducing him, getting money out of him. And so from that perspective, you can see more why Marianne would have snapped at that point, even though Claus was confessing and the judge was most likely going to sentence him to many, many years. You could see why she would just not want him to be able to say another word about her daughter. Not saying that that was the correct way to go about things. Like I said, vigilante justice, I don't think can ever be the answer, but please let me know what you think. It's so wild that she would actually do this in the courtroom in front of everybody and just not really care. Almost like she knew she would, for the most part, get away with it. Don't forget you can use code McKenna55 for 55% off your first month at Scentbird. So don't forget to speak up. Your voice is powerful enough and I love you to absolute pieces. Okay, bye.